All right, do we have everyone? Cool. So let's talk about performance. What do I mean by that? The last 600 years of medical science is for one thing and basically one thing only, is to get us back to factory setting, right? Which is getting fucked up to normal, all right? What if I want more than that, right? And I'm not talking just to get to 18.3 and do 2 rounds. I'm talking about what if, instead of taking a schizophrenic back to being able to function in society, I want to use the same technique to go from normal to better. What if I want to be sharper mentally, right? What if I want to be, what if I don't want to calm myself down, but actually want to be in a state where I feel like fighting, right? So none of all the stuff is basically going toward that. None of it is toward performance. Even the breathing stuff, the yoga, it's always to calm yourself down. Sometimes I don't want to be calm, right? So this is basically what I do. Me, I've been trying to look at what all they've been doing to get from all the fuck-ups that are trying to become to a normal life. I'm just trying to take the same principles to apply them to all of us so we can become better, right? And so there's someone I've read a lot about lately, which his name is William Reich. He was one of Freud's students, right? So psychoanalysis first. He was a psychoanalyst, but then he went into a different branch. He called that vegetative therapy. Vegetative therapy, basically the therapy of the nervous system. His idea was that we carry the stress mentally, but also physically. So he had that idea basically that there's a circle like this, and you expend energy, and whenever it hits the wall, it comes back basically. And some of it will go through, but some of it will come back. Wherever we establish a wall mentally is how we deal with life in general. Certain things will make you anxious that won't necessarily make the other person anxious. The walls we create are the walls we create we do that in order to deal with life. He had the idea that basically we do exactly the same thing somatically speaking. So physically speaking, whatever blocks you have mentally, we create physically. So that was an extremely important idea, and his idea was that if we can release that energy from the muscle, then we would allow for the body to work better. That it wasn't enough to release it mentally, you had to release it physically as well. So that's an idea that I always had anyway, and so reading him, because he had 40 years of clinical study when it comes to that, was fascinating, right? So I'd start to read about this, and I explain what I mean. Going back to this, right? The part right here, the top part right here is yellow, actually, not red. I was wrong about that. So what becomes interesting about this is if I look at the yellow, which is IT, and I make the separation between the yellow and the red, I'm going to end up here, right? I'm going to end up right here as well. Then I'm going to end up right here, for example, for those 3, right? So you can tell that's the difference between ET and IT, right? Does that look familiar? Yeah, those are the chakra points, right? So let's imagine what are those 3 spots? Those 3 spots are the difference between external torque and internal torque, right? That was my idea. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1 spot, 2 spots, 3 spots. What does that mean? So that's basically where the ET and the IT meet, right? That means that spot right here, what is called a keystone on an arch, we see the point of greatest intensity. All right, so what do we know about ET? It links to the sympathetic. And then IT links to the parasympathetic. So if I go back to this, that means those spots would be where the sympathetic and the parasympathetic meet on the map, basically on the human body, at that keystone, that point where they have the greatest intensity, the 2 mesh together. So that would mean that the chakras are the point where the nervous system is at its strongest. So that was an interesting. So you can't link the chakras to the human body based on muscle and fascia, but you can link it to the function of the human body. So we go back to description versus function. If we look at function of muscle, suddenly those chakra points have a target, basically. Now, going back to William Reich, he said that he believed that the nervous system was based on an electromagnetic energy he could actually measure. And that he found that that energy could be measured in those spots I could show. So he found the same spot for the chakras. So that would be that those spots right here have a higher level of electromagnetic charge. Now, I don't know if you guys remember what I said yesterday. Hopefully you do. But we have something called magnetite in our body, right? Which is the substance that is the most, what is it called? Magnetic substance on Earth. And our brain is coded with it and all the way to the nervous system. So that means that where the parasympathetic and sympathetic meet would have basically the most electromagnetic charge. And if you look where they meet, you end up with the chakra points as well. So it seems that basically he was right in the sense that that could be something that could be measured electromagnetically speaking. That interests me because the chakra have a 3,000-year-old basically study behind them, right, of empirical evidence of being tried through the Asian cultures. So that's something for me that would be very interesting to study. If we follow what he said, basically, it means that based on this, we are freezing certain parts of the body, certain muscle, relating to anxiety and things like this, right? We know anxiety is more in the external torque chain. So that means that if you are freezing, let's say, for anxiety in the sympathetic state, that would mean that those two muscles represent the external torque chains, right? Would be tighter, stuck, incapable of moving, which is something that I saw a lot in myself, but also in the CrossFit Games athletes and all that stuff. So that's where the idea of physical armoring is, basically, is the idea that we carry a lot of the stress in a physical way, right? So we're going back to this, right, that I was drawing yesterday, where you have action on this side, and you have safe on that side, which is anxiety side, really, which is going to be here. You're going to have anxiety here. You're going to have depression there. Disassociation, I'm going to call it depression, but technically it's disassociation, right? Bless you. Fight, and then that's ET, and then that's IT, and then that's a parasympathetic on this side, and that's a sympathetic on that side. So then I started to basically go at it at a sense of energy, right? Energy that is being produced, and it's going to start to go like this. Then you're going to end up in there. And so the energy is being produced through awareness. If it's not being spent, it's going to be spent in disassociation. The energy that is being created for the external torque, right? If it's not used during the fight, will be spent as anxiety. If it's not spent in anxiety, that means it's going to basically get stuck in the muscle and start to build up. And I would expand that all anxiety here until it's free, starts to accumulate in, for example, like a spot like this, which is exactly what I felt like. The accumulation before Jiu-Jitsu, but I could never spend it. Therefore, we just keep building up and up and up and up and up. Yep.
What is safe about the bottom side?
This is freeze, playing dead, and this is flying, fleeing away from danger, going toward the safe zone, whether you're freezing or flight. Not necessarily maybe the best word, but that's, I had to come up with something. Yep. That's the one I use. But so the idea of physical armoring, that was like we all had certain parts of our body, we basically freeze them in order to store that energy that we couldn't spend through the will. So going back to, because we were talking about that, the posture of people like this that are always stressed out. For example, William Reich had a case of a schizophrenic that could not exhale, that could not breathe, probably could not inhale or exhale. The thing is, if I need to reduce that energy, because when I have too much energy, leads to anxiety, that means I'm going to diminish the amount of energy that I have. An easiest way to do this is to basically breathe less. Less O2, less CO2 back and forth, that means I have less energy. So people that are very anxious will breathe less, especially on the exhale, because it's less CO2 being emitted, which is something you'll actually find in your athlete. Test that. Try to make them exhale and release this. This is a pure yoga stuff, right? Try to make them release here while exhaling. And you'll find that anxious people have a tremendously hard time doing that. Anybody remembers Hickson Gracie doing his abs exercise? Do you guys know who Hickson Gracie is? You know, the jiu-jitsu guy? Right, so he had you've seen, he had those exercises basically where he did meditation, where he would control his abs. You know, make them like tighten up and then go in and out and move. Like basically, he's flexing the muscle like their biceps, basically. It's actually, they do that a lot in yoga in order to free the movement of the abs. Who can actually contract and flex those correctly? Outside of this, I can't. I'm working on it, but fuck me, it's hard. It's a muscle, right? We should have probably much better control than what we have right now. There's an entire thing in yoga based on that, which I found interesting because that would kind of fit what I'm saying with the physical armoring. Right? So he had a case of someone who, in order not to breathe, would look down. If you look down like this, so if this is blocked, you push your stomach out and you look down, you will find yourself that it's very hard to exhale. You're always going to end up in an inhale phase, right? Collapse this in, and you'll raise your head up, and suddenly you can find yourself exhaling a lot better. There are certain mechanisms like that where we can block our own breathing that seems to target always the same core muscles, right? And so that's where I look at physical armoring, because I was trying to free certain parts, like to collapse my diaphragm completely here, which basically make me always stand a lot taller in a sense, but allows me to exhale more. So there's a physical armory that comes place all around here. Yep.
Is that what you were trying to mean with no?
Yes. And you see how you hinge better?
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's what I've been testing, right? So Valeria Melago, she couldn't hinge as much, right? Couldn't engage properly. So I made this collapse and exhale completely, which will release the exhale fully that time, allowing her to hinge. Because if you exhale fully, what do you get? You go toward that internal torque position. And now she was able to actually hinge fully. What if I'm here and I push? I'm toward external torque, I can't hinge. So if this is stuck like we see in CrossFit, those four muscles I refuse to move, and I'm always like, stressed out, that means I won't be able to hinge properly, which is what you see in CrossFit, people that are incapable of hinging. So maybe it's not enough to just teach them how to hinge and everything. Teach them how to breathe is great. But if that idea of physical armoring, that means all the anxiety that they have keeps going here. That means I'm going to have to free that spot if I want to free them of anxiety and allow them to hinge correctly. So it won't be enough to teach the technique. We're going to have to go at it. That's where the soft tissue work would be very interesting, is actually releasing the anxiety from the muscle so that they can actually have control of those, which will allow them to have better movement. So that's the stuff. And so far, it has worked right on target. So that's the thing, right? Is if you, well, I'm saying it, so all that stuff here is the same thing as your mental anxiety. So if I release it physically, that means I'm going to release it mentally as well. It also means that you might have the reason that you're anxious, like all those reasons that created the anxiety in the first place, coming back at you. If I release it physically, that's what something Reich talks about, then you're going to provoke a memory of why you caused it in the first place. That becomes very interesting, I got to tell you. You have to be, I kid you not, guys, you have to be ready to go there. When we've done the phylogenetic hierarchy, where you finish by stretching at the end, if you remember, I told you go, whatever comes at you at that moment, you're going to have to deal with. I had guys and ladies crying in the middle of the stretching session. They called me after saying, what the fuck was that? I was like, what did you think about? He was like, what did you think about something else? I mean, I had my mom beating me up, but to each his own. You will have basically the reason that the thing that created the physical armoring in the first place will come back at you full force. You might want to be ready to deal with it at that moment. That was so I kid you not about this. This was the way William Reich was treating schizophrenics, by releasing all that tension physically first, creating the memory that caused the problem so he could learn to deal with it. So imagine if we were to do that, not to treat schizophrenic, which I don't think is any of you yet, but imagine if we could do that for performance. Whatever those little blocks are that get in your way, that makes you too anxious for performance, maybe we could get rid of them physically and mentally by learning how to deal with the nervous system properly. Because what this is saying is this is just a block in the nervous system, right? We are just not putting it together correctly. And if you look at the phylogenetic hierarchy, even our programming is wrong, right? But if we were to program correctly based on this, right? That means we could actually have the nervous system functioning in a better way, which means we could get rid of physical armoring. And so far, it has worked. So that's the stuff I've been working on, and it's really, really fascinating. Like, you guys have to try, it's crazy. Like, I mean, Richard can tell you, we had some interesting conversation with some of our clients. Because yeah, it's an interesting rabbit hole, let's put it this way. I might spend a few years dealing with that one. But that's the stuff we've been working on lately. So, easiest stuff to start with, who can free their diaphragm, right? So, simple stuff. So here, can you do this? Can you go here and exhale fully? You'll see some of you, you'll get stuck here, there's no way it's going through. Can you collapse this? Whatever position you have to go, collapse completely at first. Can you collapse this and exhale? You'll see that some of you, who can go here and feel tremendous amount of pain? Let's start with that. Like between this ab and this ab, go here, who feels pain? I'll do it for you. But I mean, like some people are completely stuck right here. Now collapse this and exhale. How far can you go? And you'll see like some of you, like Liz, I know you can't exhale on this.
It's much better than yesterday.
So it's meant to should have come in.
Like this means like the amount of anxiety, if you're very anxious, you'll see that you cannot collapse your diaphragm and you cannot exhale fully.
It's nice leg work today.
Okay, but that means that just by learning to, you know, like even like those yoga practices that they have. So now basically I can collapse this. I'm working on my second one to collapse the second. And then eventually I'll get to here. I'm not even there yet. I'm just on my second one, but I can collapse the first two now.
I couldn't do it at all yesterday.
Yeah.
But
You're a lot less anxious today because we spent so much energy yesterday, right? Why? Because yesterday you had to face the fact that you sucked at something which you're not used to because you're a world champion, right? And I didn't let you go into, oh, I'm good. No, you're not. But so that allowed you to spend all that anxiety finally, right? And then you felt better. You slept well, right? Yeah. And, yeah, and so there's an entire work we can start to do based on that. Yeah. You know, like letting basically, yeah, correct, all the way in. Like, you know, can you go like fully all the way in?
Can, but when I fully exhale, obviously my rectus switches on to pull the rib cage down, so it sticks out again.
Yeah, but you should be able to fully exhale.
Like I can, and then at the end of the exhale,
Yeah.
just feel my abs tighten up because it's trying to pull the rib cage down.
Yeah. Then this. If you stay there, you should be able to do it. Fully exhale. But you'll want to go back here.
That's in higher.
No, like lower. The muscle lower might want to jump back into it.
Yeah.
That would be means that at the end of your exhale, your sympathetic has to take over again. I mean, so that would be the block that never lets you fully exhale. That's what the stuff he was looking at so far has worked really well on things like that.
Sort of in and out, intermittently. There's times when I breathe out and exhale and I can feel it grab and push.
Yeah.
And then there's other times when I do it and I feel it grab and release and sink in deeper.
Yeah, exactly. And the idea would you go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. Yeah.
Like down the chain?
Yeah. You should be able, like in yoga, they have those stuff where they're able to do the worm. Yeah, the worm with their abs when they'll go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
The exercise then.
That's one I'm going to try. Yep. That worm thing, we can do it with the body, but you can't do it with your abs. They can, because I've seen Hickson do it. Yeah, I can't do it like that. Yeah, it's because you're skinny, that's why. Yeah. So this, but I know this is talk. This is where I carry my anxiety always. But from what I read, I'm not the only one. So and then I found very interesting the way I was looking at the CrossFitters' abs, like the female game athletes versus the fitness models. It's not the same at all. It looks completely different. There's a non-moving quality amongst the CrossFit Games athletes, which I find fascinating. And it's pushing forward. And even the guys now, the stomach are pushing forward, and this is super thick, but it's not moving.
Could it be steroids?
There's not that much steroids in CrossFit as people think.
I think it's the same with the rugby league players because they all. My daughter always says, "Oh, they're so fat," and I'll go, "Well, they're not actually fat. A lot of them. They just have that distended."
Distended and everything, yeah. But like we're talking about CrossFitters that are like under 10% body fat. Like I've seen some of the female CrossFitters, they're 2 weeks away from a stage if they wanted to. They could go on a physique competition, diet for 2 weeks, you're good. But this is thick, and again, this is unmoving. Like
All the external unit, not the.
yeah, that too, but there's also that my belief it goes a bit further than that. Yeah, this is where they carry the anxiety, for example. But basically what the anxiety would be in the physical armoring is your spasms. Like you notice you have the stuff that keeps coming back, right? So you treat it, you do soft tissue, and then 2 weeks later you deal with a certain situation and you go like, fuck, I feel my back. You get stressed out and you go, man, I feel this. That would be where physically you carry your anxiety. That there's a way, and that's what the spasm is. It's all our energy that is trying to be spent, so it contracts to spend it, and here goes the spasm. Yep.
So does it become almost like a chicken and the egg thing in terms of the physical?
Yeah, totally. So they have to be released on both sides. But we know that from, for example, like a sports psychologist, like they have to deal with anxiety amongst great athletes a lot, right? And so there's that aspect, no question, but I think we have to release on the physical as much as on the mental as well. Now, of course, we're gonna have to touch the mental aspect as well. But it's easy to talk about it in a psychological way. How do we get it on the physical way until we realize there is such a thing? But then that means the posture is affected by that. That means if we can read those signs, we'd be able to have an assessment of a person just on how they move and see where the issues are, which we do unconsciously already. People that stand like this versus, you know how like Klokov is always scary? He walks like this and on his face you go like, oh, I don't want to get close to that guy, he might poke me in the eye, but another problem. But because you know like through the vagus nerve you can read the muscles of the face to know if someone is a danger or not. Maybe there's the same thing posturally speaking. So then we'd be able to know just from the way they move, from the way they posture, oh, issue here, therefore there's why you have a lower back spasm then will not be just you suck at hinging. That's true. You heard this because you suck at hinging, but the fact that this is stuck and you can't breathe and you're so anxious, makes you incapable of hinging. So it won't be enough for me to show you how to hinge. I'm gonna have to free some of the stuff so you are able to hinge even after I show you. Then it would be a deeper level to why you have the same spasm coming again and again and again. Like I can tell you from working with a lot of ladies that had sexual assault or rape or stuff like that, they always have left shoulder problems. Most cases. Left shoulder, not even shoulder, left shoulder, yep. There seems to be sexual, also right hip, stuff like that. It seems to target certain places more than others. But
read much about the PRI stuff, Postural Restoration Institute in
no,
the States?
I haven't. No.
It's pretty interesting. Like the whole concept, like what I started noticing when I was doing, obviously, like 10 years of PT, is that almost everyone that I dealt with had right hip problems. Like it was like 90 to 95% of people had like a weaker right glute, and like the tighter hip flex was always on the right, myself included. And I was always trying to figure out what it was that was causing it.
Yeah.
And then they had the best explanation that I've heard, which is obviously on the outside we seem pretty symmetrical, but on the inside we're not because of organ asymmetries and stuff like that. So they say that primarily comes from the diaphragm, with the liver being on the right side, so the right diaphragm hemisphere sits higher and is more domed, and the left side is flatter and lower because of the heart. Mm-hmm. They're saying that basically influences your hip anatomy because of the way the fascia ties into the cells to the diaphragm and stuff like that.
No question.
I wonder if someone who has been assaulted carries a lot more stress in general, they don't descend the diaphragm properly, so that sets off the whole imbalance through the hips and through the shoulders.
No question. My only problem with the entire medical world is their refusal to see the large muscle groups has a way to influence the nervous system. Have you ever noticed that it's never, no matter what problem you have, it's never the large muscle groups? Your squat is a problem, it's your dorsiflexion. That's what's going to cause imbalances in the hips, is the fact that your feet are not connected. I'm like, okay. And then he goes on, it's never the large, you have a problem with your shoulder, it's your rotator cuff, right? It's not the pec, it's not the lat, it's not anything like that.
Stabilizers? Stabilizers?
Okay, but what do you use first to snatch 100 kilos?
What do you use first?
Yeah, do you think you use your stabilizers to lift it?
So you have to stabilize first.
When it's overhead, you're going to use your rotator cuff to stabilize 100 kilos first. That doesn't sound like a very safe way to do it. Don't you think the muscle is going to send the big units first? So you're telling me if you have a strong rotator cuff, right, you can stabilize 100 kilos overhead regardless of the muscle mass?
You have to have both, right?
Well, yeah, okay, but we are talking about rotator cuff all the time. We are never talking about the large muscle groups. Yeah. I've never seen in the entire field people talking about imbalances in large muscle groups modifying gross movement pattern. There is an article from Kelly Starrett stating that imbalances in the large muscle groups will not change gross movement pattern.
He's not in step with the majority of manual
Also, I
therapists.
hope not. God, I hope not. Yeah.
Most manual therapists that I know in Australia, particularly the ones that are
Australia's
dealing
pretty good though.
with CrossFitters, are going to look at whole shoulder girdle movement, whole hip movement, and they're not just going to focus on your stabilizers.
Okay, but for example, do they look at the size of the quad versus the hammies?
I didn't say where.
No. No, I'm asking you. I'm not making fun. I'm asking. This seems to be an issue in the field where I think there's a cultural bias, honestly, where the large muscle groups are never looked at the source of anything. I had many conversations when they say the muscle is just a piece of flesh that responds to the nervous system. Right, so do you think the skin influences nervous system? Obviously, right? What about breathing? Organs. So then muscles as well. Right? They would have to. This is the largest organs we have is the muscle groups. They have to influence the nervous system as well. So an imbalance in the large muscle groups will result in an effect on the nervous system. Doesn't matter left versus right or stuff like that, like there versus here or here versus here.
So when you say it doesn't get talked about, as in people are always trying to fix problems elsewhere?
It's never part of the conversation of whether it's a nervous system or injuries. We are not talking about the VMO versus the outside quad. We are not enough VMO, but not in the sense of the side, the mass of the leg or stuff like that. Yeah. Like we know that when you get stronger, you get bigger, but yet that doesn't seem to affect the conversation as to how do I get my snatch from 100 kilos to 105. The first thing we say, rotator cuff. I'm like, how strong can the rotator cuff be? Exactly. I don't think it's going to carry you from 100 to 105. I think the large muscle groups will have a bigger impact in that case. But that's never part of the conversation. Why? Because the conversation is based in a field that is responsible in basically getting you from fucked up back to normal. Then it matters. You have surgery, first thing I want you to do is this. Because we're going to rebuild that. But once it's rebuilt to performance, we have to look at the large muscle groups. But that's not part of the conversation.
Can I add to what I said? Yep. At uni, we are taught that the stabilizers stabilize and the large muscle groups produce power, and that's all there is to it. So if you have a practitioner, be it a physio or a chiro or an osteo, who you have a shoulder problem and all they do is treat your rotator cuff, then I agree with Julian, you should walk out of there as fast as you can.
Well, that's most of the States. I don't know Australia well, but I can tell you that's mostly what I face in the States.
The people who know what they're doing, I think in physiotherapy it's a bit different, because I think more and more in Australia they've got some really good approaches to movement, but the practitioners who know what they're doing more and more, and I hope I'm more and more becoming one of them, understand that you've got to look at global movement, and that the big muscle groups will affect stability and the small stabilizers will do more than just stabilize and everything.
Yeah, so everything moves, But me, I just want the large muscle groups to be included, because then, if they're included in the nervous system group, then the physical armoring makes a lot more sense. Because when I read William Reich, I was like, that's what I saw. Basically, I saw someone who included, even though he did it him through massage and everything, but it's not the point, is that then he would explain his theory makes a lot more sense, especially if you have the ET and IT relating to the nervous system. Yeah.
When you're talking about those immobile abs that you see quite frequently in CrossFitters and a lot of other people as well, wouldn't that like structurally be due to the fact that those abs are taking on the job of the transverse oblique, so they then start to widen and set out through here to try and take over for what is essentially weakness through there, and then you end up with a widening of the linear alba, which is
it's not wide, it's just not moving. But let's say that the training that we are doing, right, is locking those in place so they can take over for a lack of rotation, because there's no rotation in CrossFit, right? Let's say they're not widening, but they're just getting thicker, and to the point where they're stabilizing in the linear movement because there's no rotation so much, they're locking in, right? So if the physical armoring is true, that means we would be creating an exercise that will create more anxiety. Because it works both ways. If anxiety is getting stuck here, I get this stuck, I create anxiety. Right, so that means that just by doing CrossFit the way we're doing it, we could create an entire generation of athletes that get more and more anxious. So it's going to chicken and the egg, but that could work that way as well.
But because of the fact, like they also tend to sit like it's not, like they're not like bodybuilders' abs where they rub against each other like this kind of nice kind of sandwich shape going down the middle. They tend to sit further apart, like by a centimeter or so. So therefore, thickening of the linear alba between the abs and that's just connective tissue, which will immobilize a lot.
Yeah, to take over. Yeah, maybe. I think I saw a lot of them that were not that distended, but yeah, that's something to look at, for example. But for me, I look at it in the other way, which means if this is taking over for that, we are physically creating we are basically forcing a physical armoring, which could have an effect on the mental as well. If the physical and the mental is the same thing, just one is mentally, one is physical, by creating physical armoring here, we might end up creating anxiety amongst our athletes. So that's not good for performance, right? So maybe you can create an entire link of basically like how to work things properly could help your athletes move better mentally as well as physically, in a sense. Imagine if it goes both ways, right? If it's a street that goes both ways, which I really think it is, right? That means we could create an entire generation of women that are going to end up in a compulsive behavior by training a certain way.
Meaning that there's likely a lot of women and men that never push themselves in a performance setting, so they'll never find these physical armaments, so they'll never be able to deal with their mental armoring.
Yeah, well, the key is, let's say you create a small physical armoring, not a bit that is not as obvious as the abs not moving. You are still going to create more anxiety in your clients. That's not what you want, no matter what, right? Because that goes against performance. And just not talking about in workouts, just better overall, basically. Imagine like if we were to improperly train people, we would create our own brand of physical armoring, which would end up hurting people, mentally as well as physically, if those are connected. Like if you look at the chakras, we have 3,000 years of history where they say any imbalance between the chakras lead to certain imbalances mentally and and certain illnesses and everything. Imagine if you train people a certain way that you imbalance, not on purpose, but through training, all that flow. Then you would actually create yourself a whole new set of issues. As a coach who's trying to make people better, not worse, that would matter to me. Right? Because that'd be a problem. That means the harder you train them in an improper way, the more problems you're going to create. Right? The more anxiety you're going to have, the worse the performance.
Do you think then that the mental armoring gets more severe as the physical armoring does as well?
Yeah, they're connected. Yeah. So imagine what the monster we could be creating in that sense. And you've seen those athletes that get that push and push more. They get more and more stressed out. What do? They want to go to a gym and push more, which stresses them more and more. And now it's more volume is better. And before you know it, they spend 6 hours a day in the gym, sacrificing relationship, family, their mental health for what again? And they can't even tell you. And we're not talking about going to the Olympics. We're talking about people that will be maybe making it to regionals with no money, no reason, and then they push, and here goes the relationship, here goes everything at the expense of their entire life. They're sacrificing themselves without having a goal to sacrifice for. That's something I've been seeing a lot for the last 2, 3, 4 years now, and I keep asking them to explain to me the why, and they can never tell me. This is a compulsive behavior. So it's like, I'm wondering if we're not creating a loop where we put those athletes through, and I'm like, ooh, there's a darkness there. No. Yeah. No, I'm using an example, but unfortunately, then you see it. Like, look, how many people do you have? People that are going to be 2000s in the Open that are so stressed for 6 weeks, right? So something's wrong, right? That's not the point. That's not why we started CrossFit, right? But imagine if on top of messing them up mentally, we would mess them up physically. That means we would be creating the injuries we're trying to fix. It's great for business, but it's not good for as a coach, right? So that's why I'm wondering if like all the spasms that I see here is not just past them not being to hinge. If there's not a deeper level to this that is being created through anxiety and everything. That means if I can free that, I can free anxiety, I'll have less spasm. To me, that's something extremely interesting to go toward. Because then that means the correct exercise is the best drug for health out there on more than one level, which I believe anyway. But then that adds another layer to it. So this was written, that guy it was 100 years ago, right, that he started writing about this. Imagine if you could link this to what we know now about the nervous system and everything, imagine how much further we could push all this. That's why the nervous system interests me so much, because we could make people a lot better. And then we could use it instead of treating messed up people to normal, we can actually use all this for performance. But mental performance as much as physical one, which right now there's a gap between the two, right? Which is ridiculous because you can't perform physically if you can't perform mentally. You have that with your athletes, right? Suddenly they're in the middle of a competition and then they need to talk to you about stuff they already know because they're freaking out. That hinders performance, right? And so, but me, I think it goes further. Once they start to crack mentally, they crack physically and vice versa. And now you have someone that breaks. So that's the stuff I've been working the most on, basically. But if I understand this correctly, then I can have certain things like how can I make her hinge better just by releasing a certain stuff, and then suddenly she's going further. It felt better, right? It didn't feel blocked anymore. So by understanding the principles correctly, then I can affect directly a movement as simple as the hinge.
Can you still be as strong in the hinge?
Of course.
Without, so I always did the opposite. I always crunch into it and lock those rectors.
I know, but we don't have to do that. Yeah, it's not about crunching here, it's about pushing that. If you engage external obliques, it's going to make you crunch anyway. But it's not by crunching that you're going to get to it. It's by engaging the other muscle, the external obliques opener, the external obliques. And the transverse, and then I'm going to make you go here, but not through here, through here. Because if you're here, you're locking all this, we're going back to probably triggering anxiety, which was your problem on stage. Yeah. So I think it's related. Yeah. I think it's the same thing, basically. So imagine if we could target it correctly. It could be that simple. Not easy, but that simple. So to me, that matters a lot because I've seen too many athletes basically ruining their mental health through training a certain way, which was one of them, let's be honest. But so yeah, so to me, that's a very interesting thing. And again, and if we could link the chakras to a physical spot, then we have 3,000 years of a study that can help us on how to correct the nervous system. So that's the stuff we've been working on so much. And so far, it works really well. Maybe not in a class setting, but that's another problem. Questions on this? Okay, cool. So make you move one more openers, then we'll do the Q&A. Which one are we doing, the bicep? Let's do the bicep opener, and then we'll do the Q&A. So if you can just set up the benches, please, with 20 kilo plates under, 25 kilo plates under, so we can elevate them a little bit.